Hi, y'all. It's Rick here on Holy or Maundy Thursday. I'm glad you're joining me for this message. Let us begin as we always begin by realizing and recognizing and allowing ourselves to sink into the reality that we are always and everywhere in the holy presence of God and each other. So, I had a couple of things in mind that I wanted to share in this message until a little while ago, I was listening to a short story from a book that I've already talked about. And I've decided that's what I want to really focus on in this reflection. So I want to still say the first two things because I do think they're relevant to this little book excerpt, this little story reading that I'm going to offer to you. So here goes. If you looked at my written post for today, which is about Maundy Thursday, I wanted to underscore something in it. And also, I wanted to emphasize something that I don't think I emphasized enough. Let's start with the second one there. I was reminded in an article that I was reading a little while ago that Maundy comes from mandate or mandato is, I think, the Latin. It means command, right? And the command Thursday is twofold, right? In some ways, the command is do this in remembrance of me, which is the institution, as we say, of the Eucharist, right? Receiving Jesus's body and blood. I also think, and that's in the synoptic gospels, right? That's what they focus on, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. In John's gospel, that taking of the cup and the bread is not even there. What is there is what I wrote about, which is the washing of the feet. And also what we would call the Last Supper discourse, where Jesus has many, many words, like 3 chapters worth of words to say as kind of a valedictory address to his friends. And one of the things, I think the key thing that he says there is about love, right? They will know you are my followers by the love that you have for each other. There is no greater that love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friend. So the Maundy, the mandate of the Thursday that we are remembering is that love one another as I have loved you. Now, one of the ways that we do that liturgically to remind us of that is we wash the feet during this evening's liturgy. And I'm planning on going to liturgy at my church. I don't recall if I've been to a Maundy Thursday liturgy with this particular church. I do think, and I do hope very much, that it is the ritual in washing each other's feet, because I think that is so different and so much more engaging, certainly, and evocative than just watching a priest or a deacon wash, 12 volunteers up on the stage, so to speak. Instead, we are taking off our shoes. We are bending our knees to do something quite intimate by any measure of the imagination, to wash another's feet. And certainly culturally, we see in John's telling of this how scandalized Peter and the others are that the master, Jesus, would go down and do what a servant does on their, quite frankly, filthy feet. Nevertheless, even in our time, it is still a vulnerable gesture. And I want to raise the question again, just as a thought experiment. What if the Christian tradition, the followers of the way of Christ, if we had incorporated long ago, maybe back there at the beginning, that ritual either instead of the receiving of the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist, or in addition to, how might things be different, right? How might it be different? And why didn't it go that way? I'm sure scholars can give an answer to that as they look at the history of the church and how things develop. And I'm sure there's a logical reason, I am sure. I want to offer my thesis. And I think my thesis is this: is it was too intimate for folks, those early folks, to want to do. That they also were uncomfortable hearing about Jesus doing it and doing it themselves, right? Like it'll be interesting because tonight, again, I'm hoping that where I worship will do this. There will be numerous people who will not come forward to do that. And there's any number of reasons why. Mobility, they don't want, they're not able to get down to do the washing. They are afraid of, what their feet might look like. And I think that's really kind of where it is. They are afraid to be vulnerable. They are afraid to bare themselves, even if it's just their feet, to each other. And I think that is so unfortunate because we have this idea, and quite honestly, I think the Eucharist can really foster this, this idea that we have to be worthy and we have to be pure and we have to be clean to come and receive the body and blood of Christ, rather than what Jesus did, where he just dined with people. And he presented that, and it was in the act of his presenting, his being there, and their showing up as they were, that they were saved, so to speak. They were forgiven. They were brought into this new community that Jesus was forming. So I think that has something to do with it. And I think, again, so many of us are in churches where the last thing we want to do is to be vulnerable and to share. And even a ritual of baring our feet and washing each other's feet would be too intimate, would make us too vulnerable, because then it would be more likely that, once we have done that and have recognized the importance of receiving that and offering others to wash our feet, because there's a giving and a receiving there, that it might be too much for us to share from our hearts and our souls. And again, y'all, that is so unfortunate. That is so unfortunate. And I think, again, that is led in many ways to what we are seeing in the diminishing church and in the folks that, who still are, vociferously, vocally Christian, being these nationalists who are all about earthly power and force and violence even, and so forth. So that was my first thought. My second thought is the briefer thought, and it has to do with Kilmar Abbrego Garcia. And you might have heard that there has been more information coming out about his past, and that there were concerns by his wife, who is now trumpeting his defense, that he was abusive, and there was concerns. So the picture of him is definitely more complicated, right? And that is kind of where some people on the two sides of this, the side of MAGA wanting to, he's a bad dude, he should be there, doesn't really matter if we made a mistake, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet kind of thing. Or the other side, this, he's innocent, bring him home so he can live this, wonderful life that he was living. Well, it's a lot more complicated than that. And I'm going to put into my notes, or maybe here in the chat, an article that I read that was really good, just listing facts that we know about this and recognizing that his story is complicated. But y'all, here's what's not complicated. And this is where I think we need to be on this, is the government deported him wrongly. They admitted that. He was sent where he should not have been sent. The Supreme Court, no less, and two judges in two separate different ways have told the government, the regime, that's what we got to call the T-Rump government regime, that he needed to be brought home. And then what we saw in the Oval Office, the joking and all of that, is unacceptable. It's un-American. It is dangerous. And because, again, if T-Rump is allowed to violate the courts, which really are our last bulwark right now, his talk about sending homegrowns is going to happen. Don't think about anything else. If there's anything we know about him, especially at this point, is that when he says something, he does everything possible to make it happen. That includes even crazy things that he's talked a lot about that we haven't seen yet, annexing Greenland and Canada as the 51st state. I think we just got to wait, and we're going to see that. If there's anything that we can no longer do, is to have a failure of imagination where we say, oh, that couldn't happen. It couldn't happen that, Trump would round up his enemies, political enemies, and put them on a plane and send them to this gulag in El Salvador and say we can't get them back. Well, you know what, y'all? If this stands with the complicated person of Abbrego Garcia, if this stands that he is not brought home, that the T-Rump regime does not follow court orders, that is the pathway that we are on. And I can't guarantee that we're going to see that. All I can say is that we are opening the door to that. And if anything we know, Trump breaks doors and he walks through doors that have been opened to him. So I guess I said a little more on my first two things than on my third thing, which is the little bit of reading. But I'll close with this reading and I'll kind of let it speak for itself. It's from George Saunders' book. He published it in October of 22. It's a book of short stories called Liberation Day. I shared with you the title story, Liberation Day, and I hope you've picked up the book. I really hope you've read that story. It's really quite something about freedom and about enslavement and about human rights and so on and so forth. Well, the story that I want to read just a little piece of is from the third story in there. It's called Love Letter. And it is a grandfather writing to his grandson, advising him and telling the story of a totalitarian and authoritative regime that has risen. And keep in mind, this is 22. Trump was on his way to becoming the Republican nominee, certainly wasn't on his way yet to the victory. So Saunders is writing this story before. And I think if anything, it is even more true to us now. And the piece I want to read to you is the piece where this writer, this grandfather, is looking back and trying to justify to his grandson why he and others in his cohort, in his peer group. Now, we don't know how long it's been since this regime has taken over in the world of the story, but we know it has been some time. And this is what the grandfather says. And I'm going to end with this because, again, we are at this moment. We are at this moment where we can and should and must act. We got protests again, day after tomorrow. We need to make them as big, if not bigger, than the first one that we had, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, right? They need to be huge. And they need to have a focus on following the court order, talking about a lawless regime, all of that. We have to do that. So here's what I'm going to close with, and here's what the unnamed grandfather who is writing says. He says, "I feel I am disappointing you. I just want to say that history, when it arrives, may not look as you expect based on reading the history books. Things in there are always so clear. One knows exactly what one would have done. Your grandmother and I and many others would have had to be more extreme people than we were during that critical period to have done whatever it was we should have been doing. Our lives had not prepared us for extremity, to mobilize or to be focused and energized as I can see in retrospect we would have needed to be. We were not prepared to drop everything in defense of a system that was to us like oxygen, used constantly, never noted. We were spoiled, I think I am trying to say, as were those on the other side, willing to tear it all down because they had been so thoroughly nourished by the vacuous plenty in which we all lived, a bountiful condition that allowed people to thrive and opine and swagger around like kings and queens while remaining ignorant of their own history." Yeah, y'all, that's where we are. And the question now remains not just what are we going to do, because I think we are beginning to know what we need to do and what we may need to do. The level of engagement, civil disobedience, general strikes, nonviolent, all nonviolent. That is coming. That is on the horizon. But today, tomorrow, in the streets, we have an opportunity. And I just want to close with the prayer that we can just be bold, that we can just know that right now we are in historic times where our freedom is being taken away. And the question is, what are we going to do? And how are we going to do it? And let's not be like this grandfather years ago when what we have still today is gone. And we're having to explain to our children or grandchildren, what happened? And we're there, quite honestly, pointing fingers at us. Why did you not do more? Well, let's do more. Let's do it together. Let's do it with love. Let's do it with Jesus's boldness, his servant heart. Let's do it, y'all. Blessing and peace. Be well.